The FIA and race stewards have been a lightning rod for controversy and criticism in the past couple of seasons, and the 2021 Austrian Grand Prix has put them in the spotlight once again. While Max Verstappen was coasting to his third straight victory in front of the Orange Army, drivers further down the field were getting their elbows out and rubbing paint with their rivals. It was Verstappen's teammate Sergio Perez who started the on-track battles as he lost out to Lando Norris on the safety car restart into Turn 4. Norris was handed a 5-second penalty for forcing another driver off track as Perez tumbled down the order. Oddly enough, Perez was then involved in two more incidents later in the race, both with Charles Leclerc. He was slapped with two separate 5-second penalties for both incidents as he ended up coming home to finish 6th. The race stewards certainly weren't shy in dishing out penalties in Austria, but were some of them just too harsh? Was the racing that we saw in Spielberg not what the fans and the drivers have been asking for? In this video, we'll take a closer look at all three incidents and whether they were hard racing or harsh penalties, and why we don't want to see F1 racing become too sanitized in the future. What started the penalty fest in Austria was a squabble between McLaren's Lando Norris and Red Bull's Sergio Perez. The incident took place on lap 4 after the safety car restart, as Perez had a good run on Norris going into Turn 4. As you can see, they were side by side as they braked for the corner, but Norris owned the inside line as they reached the apex of Turn 4. Perez kept his nose in and ultimately paid for it as he went wide into the gravel. Now, it is my opinion that this penalty given to Norris was far too harsh. Norris was the lead driver who owned the inside line as they went into the apex. Drivers should know that Turn 4 in Austria is a difficult place to overtake, especially on the outside due to the downhill braking and large gravel trap runoff. Norris did not make contact with Perez, and he kept his racing line throughout the corner, so why should he be penalized for making the smarter racing move? I think Perez made a mistake by committing to that overtake, knowing how narrow the margins were, and he should have backed out of it and tried at a different point in the circuit, considering how early it was in the race. As the driver who is behind and on the outside, you should expect to be squeezed out of room, and I don't see how this is anything more than good, hard, and fair racing. Post-race, even though he picked up another podium, Norris was clearly not happy with the penalty, but offered up a good summary of what many fans thought of as an unfair penalty. Quote, "I expect Sergio knows there's gravel on the exit of that corner. It's downhill, easy to run wide, and that's just what happens. So he took the risk and not me. He didn't commit to his overtake the way he should have done, and he put himself in the gravel. So I don't feel like it was my mistake, but I don't make the penalties." Even Perez's bosses were in agreement with McLaren, as Christian Horner and Helmut Marko both thought it was just a racing incident. Some fans immediately drew comparisons to Hamilton and Albon at the same corner in 2020, but that incident was a little different as Albon was much further ahead at that point, and the onus was on Hamilton to back out of it in order to avoid a crash. Interestingly enough, just a few corners before Perez went wide into Turn 4, Norris and Perez went wheel-to-wheel going into Turn 1, and Perez went wide into the runoff area, so maybe the FIA should have looked at that one as well. Now here are two more forcing a driver off-track incidents that are debatable in this race. After the early race drama, Perez was feeling the pressure from Ferrari's Charles Leclerc as the Monegasque sent a late one around the outside of Turn 4 once again. Now you can draw a lot of similarities in this incident with Norris and Perez, and I think you could also chalk it up to being a racing incident. Leclerc was much further back than Perez when they approached the braking zone. When they both reached the apex turning into the corner, Leclerc was slightly ahead, but both cars were almost side by side as Perez touched Leclerc. Again, as with Norris and Perez, this was a 50-50 battle in which you could chalk it up to a racing incident. The move from Leclerc was aggressive and bold, but there is always a risk as a driver when you try and overtake on the outside. Now a few laps later, Perez and Leclerc renewed their friendship by going wheel-to-wheel into Turn 6, with Leclerc again on the outside. Now this penalty is somewhat more understandable as Perez has a moment of oversteer which makes him turn into Leclerc as he corrects his car, which forces Charles into the gravel. But still, all things considered, do we really want the stewards deciding the places at a Grand Prix? In conclusion, I saw these incidents as hard racing and the penalties just too harsh for what happened on track. At the very least, we can commend the FIA for being consistent in their application of the penalties, even if we don't necessarily agree with the penalty itself. The drivers have always asked the FIA to let them race, but I think we have to lay some blame on the drivers themselves for the stewards' strict policing methods. The drivers can say all they want that they want to race hard against their rivals, but as soon as they get close to each other, they're immediately on the radio for the incident to be reported. Leclerc's frustration with Perez was understandable, but Leclerc is also one of the more aggressive drivers on the grid who's had his fair share of incidents, so should he be all that surprised that the driver fought him hard? At the end of the day, maybe I'm stuck in the past of memories of Villeneuve versus Arnoux, or Kubica versus Massa, when these types of battles defined the meaning of hard racing. Sunday's Austrian Grand Prix battles were nowhere near the intensity of those scraps, and yet they all got penalized. Maybe we need to reassess what forcing another driver off track means, but we don't want to see a pattern of penalizing drivers for what should be just racing incidents. At any rate, it keeps the race stewards busy in Austria and lit the fire of debate in the F1 world. So what do you guys think? Were the penalties handed out to Norris and Perez justified, or would you just chalk it up to a racing incident? Comment your thoughts down below, and if you've enjoyed this analysis, leave this video a like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.